Hey everyone, ready to dive into a life story that's even more twisty than a Hitchcock film?
Sounds exciting.
We're talking Lee Miller, Vogue cover girl turned war photographer right in the thick of World War II.
Wow, what a change.
There's this new biopic simply called Lee, and Kate Winslet's the star.
Oh, I've heard of that.
But you know what our source is? A movie review. They say the movie kind of misses some of the really fascinating parts of her life.
Interesting.
So let's see if we can dig up some of those missing pieces, Cal.
Sounds like a plan.
So the reviewer actually calls the film stodgy.
Stodgy.
Yeah, like one of those paint-by-numbers biopics.
Like it just hits all the expected points.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, she was a model, then she's a photographer, then bam, World War II.
And that's what makes me curious because the review mentions that the film doesn't really explore what pushed her to make such a huge life change.
Exactly. Like, what made her go from the glitz and glamour to documenting the horrors of war?
It's pretty wild to imagine being Lee Miller, right? One minute she's part of this super glamorous art scene in pre-war Europe.
Oh, yeah. The reviewer even name drops Marion Cotillard and Noémie Merlant as being part of her circle.
Wow, just living it up, practically ignoring the whole Hitler situation
Can
brewing.
you imagine? That must have been something. But then everything flips on its head.
Yeah, the reviewer talks about feeling this gulp of sadness, knowing that all that freedom wouldn't last.
Oh, I felt that too. Like a real punch in the gut?
Yeah.
You ever had anything like that happen in your life where like everything just changed overnight?
Well, I think we've all had those moments in different ways, haven't we?
Yeah, for sure.
But for Lee Miller, it wasn't just personal. It was the whole world shifting on its axis. And she went from capturing beauty in fashion to documenting the brutal reality of war. It's got to leave a mark, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And here's something that really struck me. Kate Winslet has been attached to this project for almost a decade. Talk about dedication.
Wow, a decade.
Makes you wonder, what was it about Lee Miller's story that resonated with her so much?
Well, if you look at Winslet's career lately, she's been choosing roles about complex, strong women,
That's true.
like Mayor of Easttown, Ammonite, I Am Ruth. These aren't your typical lighthearted Hollywood roles.
No, they're definitely not your typical Oscar bait picks either. She's making some bold choices. And this reviewer actually calls Winslet's performance as Lee Miller formidable, seductive, and steely.
Wow, those are powerful words.
Sounds like she really owns the role.
It almost feels like she saw something in Lee Miller that went beyond the typical war photographer story, something about her resilience, maybe her artistic vision, or even just how she made it in a world dominated by men.
Right. Okay, so we've got this fascinating woman, potentially underwhelming biopic, and an Oscar-winning actress who clearly feels very strongly about the story. So where do we go from here?
Well, let's try and uncover those missing pieces. The relationships, the motivations, the things that made Lee Miller tick. The review mentions a brief but intense fling with a character played by Alexander Skarsgård.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently, he even has this kind of spotty British accent.
I can't resist a good accent critique.
Oh, come on! But anyway, tell me more about these relationships. Was there anyone who really got through to her who understood what she was going through?
Yeah, good question.
Well, there's this interesting dynamic with a young photojournalist played by, get this, Andy Samberg.
Wait, Andy Samberg, like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Andy Samberg.
Yep, that's the one.
That is unexpected.
Makes you wonder if they were trying to lighten the mood a bit, with all the heavy war stuff.
Yeah, guess we'll have to see how that plays out. But you mentioned other relationships too, right? Like, what about her connection to Vogue? She was a model and a photographer for them, which must have been a tough balancing act during the war.
It was, and that's where her relationship with her editor, played by Andrea Riseborough, comes into play.
Oh, interesting.
The review hints at this clash between Lee wanting to show the raw truth of the war and what Vogue and society in general might have considered acceptable to show.
Ooh, that's a juicy conflict.
Great.
I could already picture the arguments. So it seems like even though the biopic might be sticking to a pretty familiar formula, there are still these little glimpses into the complexities of Lee Miller's life.
For sure, and by piecing together those glimpses and adding some historical context and a closer look at her work, maybe we can start to paint a richer portrait of who she really was.
Okay, let's do it. We've got a fascinating woman to uncover, a biopic to dissect, and a whole lot of deep diving ahead. Let's go.
I'm ready. We keep talking about this huge shift in Lee Miller's life from fashion to war photography.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your head around it, right?
And it's not like she just went over there to take pictures of battles. Her war photography, it went way deeper. She captured the human cost, the emotional impact of it all.
That makes sense, I guess. I mean, everyone was taking pictures of battles, right?
Mhm.
What made her work stand out? Did she have like a specific style or approach that set her apart from other war photographers?
Well, for one, she didn't shy away from the tough stuff.
Okay.
There's this one famous photo she took of a dead SS guard in a bathtub. It's powerful and chilling, and it really shows you just how raw and real things were.
Wow. I can only imagine.
Yeah.
So she wasn't afraid to show the world the truth, even when it was ugly. But I'm also thinking about her time with Vogue.
Uh,
You know, did that experience influence her war photography in any way?
it's a good question. It's like on one hand, you have the world of fashion, all about beauty and aesthetics,
Right.
and on the other, you have the harsh realities of war. But maybe they're not so different after all. Maybe it's about seeing the world through a different lens, even when everything's falling apart.
Maybe she was looking for those little moments of humanity, those glimmers of beauty or hope, even in the most unexpected places.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes her work so powerful. It's not just about documenting events, it's about capturing the human experience, the
Mm.
emotions behind it all.
It's amazing. I keep coming back to this idea of her transformation going from fashion to war.
Hmm.
What do you think was like the turning point for her? Was it one specific event or was it more of a gradual shift?
It's tough to say for sure, but there are a few things to consider. The review mentions that encounter with the Alexander Skarsgård character.
Right, right.
Maybe that sparked something in her, a sense of adventure or a desire to see the world beyond the fashion scene.
Yeah, and then there's Andy Samberg's character too, the young photojournalist. Maybe their dynamic pushed her in a new direction, showed her a different way of seeing things through the lens.
Possibly. And of course, there's her relationship with her editor, played by Andrea Riseborough. Imagine the conversations they must have had.
Oh, I bet.
Lee wanting to push the boundaries of what was considered acceptable, and her editor trying to balance that with what Vogue readers were used to.
That clash of perspectives must have been intense. Makes you wonder if Lee ever felt like she had to compromise her artistic vision to fit in with the fashion world.
It's a thought-provoking question, but I think it also shows her strength. She
Mm.
wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo, to push back against expectations and forge her own path.
So it sounds like those relationships, the romance, the mentorship, the professional back and forth, they might have all played a part in shaping her journey.
It's very likely they were catalysts, each pushing her to confront her own beliefs and figure out what she really stood for. And ultimately, I think that's what led her to the battlefields of World War II. That's where she found her voice as a photographer, unafraid to show the world the truth, no matter how hard it was to look at.
It's funny, the review called the film stodgy for sticking to that typical biopic formula.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if that approach really does justice to how complex Lee Miller's life really was.
Well, that's the struggle with biopics, isn't it? How do you take a whole life with all its ups and downs and squeeze it into a 2-hour film?
Especially someone like Lee Miller. Model, muse, photographer, war correspondent. Talk about wearing many hats.
And she lived through such a crazy time in history. The world was changing so fast, and she was right there in the middle of it all, capturing it through her lens.
That's so true. It makes you think about the impact of her work, not just on the people who saw it back then, but on all of us today. What do you think her legacy is?
I think especially her war photography, it still speaks to people today. It's a reminder of what war really costs us,
Yeah.
of how fragile peace is and how important it is to speak out against injustice.
And to look beyond the headlines,
Yeah.
to see the real people behind the stories. And remember that war is never just about politics or strategy. It's about human lives.
Absolutely. And Lee Miller's work, it reminds us that those lives deserve to be remembered and honored and understood.
It's kind of wild to think that even though the biopic might not have been perfect, it still got people talking about Lee Miller and her work again.
It really shows you that sometimes even a flawed portrayal can spark people's curiosity.
Yeah, like it gave us a place to start, a foundation to build on.
Right.
And through our deep dive, we've been able to explore those parts of her life that the movie kind of skimmed over.
Like the little details of her relationship.
Right, exactly. Her motivations,
Yeah.
why she made the choices she did, and what impact her work had.
And it's been so interesting piecing it all together, you know, seeing how all those pieces connect to give us a fuller picture of who she was.
I know it's really fascinating, right? It makes me wonder, though, as we're wrapping up our exploration into Lee Miller's world, what would she think about all this attention all these years later? The movie, all the discussions, the renewed interest in her life.
Well, it's a good question.
Would she be into it?
Knowing her, independent spirit and how committed she was to telling the truth, I think she'd be glad that people are appreciating her work.
Yeah, for sure. But I also think she'd push us to go beyond the surface,
Mm-hmm.
to really grapple with the complexity of her story and what war really costs
Yeah,
us.
to really understand it.
Not just through her photographs, but through our own understanding of history and what's happening in the world today.
She might even encourage us to question the stories we're told, to dig a little deeper, and to use our own voices to make sense of it all.
That's powerful stuff. And it feels so fitting for a woman who broke the mold, embraced challenges, and left a legacy that makes us think.
Lee Miller's story is a testament to what humans are capable of, to reinventing ourselves and always searching for truth, even when things are at their darkest.
So there you have it, folks. Our deep dive into the world of Lee Miller, a woman who was full of contradictions, a true trailblazer, and an artist who captured both beauty and the horrors of war. Her story, it sticks with you.
I hope this exploration has made you curious to learn more about Lee Miller and her work. She's someone we should all remember and celebrate and really think about.
And as always, we encourage you to keep the conversation going, share your thoughts, and keep exploring the lives of those who dared to be different. Until next time, keep diving